Well, the gospel question is, who do you think will lose tonight in the big game? Things fall apart. Tonight somebody will lose everything they lived for in their career for some... Well, this is Gary's from last week. So. All right. Okay, now on a serious note here. Okay. The real gospel question is, what is your reaction to a sick person? Keep your distance so that you don't catch what they have. Get uncomfortable if they are really sick, perhaps even dying, because you don't know what to say or what to do. Feel so bad for them that you avoid them because you don't like feeling sad. Or jump in there and try to help if that's possible. Or if not, just comfort them with your presence if that's all that can be done. Or maybe it's a little bit of all these ways of responding all mixed together. Now, in our readings for today's Mass, we see two different reactions to a particular kind of a sick person, a leper. Leprosy, or Hansen's disease as it is called today, had terrified people since ancient times. It was reported as early as 600 BC in India, China, and Egypt. And leprosy is referenced 68 times in the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament, and 13 times in the Christian Scriptures, the New Testament. Now, scholars believe that not all those references about Hansen's disease per se were about Hansen's disease per se, but probably about other kinds of infectious diseases of the skin. Nonetheless, it was a very serious affliction in ancient times and caused those who suffered it to be outcast from their communities. Witness the reading from Leviticus we just heard that required the leper to declare himself unclean and obligated him to live outside, apart from the camp, away from others. Now, contrast that with the response Jesus had to the leper in today's reading from Mark's Gospel. Jesus did the unthinkable. He reached out and touched the man with leprosy, the man who begged Jesus to heal him. Now, the story is very succinct. Here it is. A leper came to Jesus, kneeling down, begged him, and said, "If you wish, you can make me clean." Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand, touched him, and said to him, "I do will it, be made clean." Now, this sounds like a pretty straightforward transaction and conversation. And what's missing from the story, I think, but implied in the words that we heard that Jesus was moved with pity, it was Jesus' emotional reaction to this poor man who had just begged him for healing. "If you wish, you can make me clean." Now just imagine what this man felt. Desperate people don't usually waste words. When you really need help, sometimes help is about all you can manage to say. In my mind, I see Jesus so choked up that he could hardly talk. Moved with pity. All Jesus could manage to say was, "Okay," or "I do will it be made clean." So how do all of us respond when we encounter a sick or a suffering person? Do we take the Old Testament path of avoidance, or do we jump in there the way Jesus did? Now, I had two experiences recently that made me think about how I personally respond to a sick person or person in some kind of pain, whether the pain be physical, emotional, or social in nature. Now, some of you know my older brother Dennis died in January this year, January 18th. He had suffered from heart damage from several small heart attacks over the past 3 or 4 years and really went downhill after he had a major heart attack around Thanksgiving in 2016. So on January 15th of this year, I was called by one of Dennis's daughters, and she told us that Dennis, who was in hospice by this time, had taken a turn for the worse. So my wife Mary and I left the next day for Los Angeles and arrived there late Tuesday. So Mary and I, along with my two sisters, joined our nieces and their families as we all sat vigil on Tuesday night, Wednesday day and night. And Dennis died at 3:58 a.m. on Thursday. Now, many of you have had similar experiences supporting a dear friend or family member through an illness or through the dying process. It's not an easy thing to do. It's painful. It's natural to want to run away from it. But there's something in us. Call it love, call it grace, call it God, that causes us to be moved with pity, like Jesus, and that keeps us from avoiding the pain of being with the person by fleeing, no less than if they were a leper. The second experience I had was just a few weeks ago at a meeting sponsored by the Interfaith Latin American Coalition, which is a group which is endorsed by the Archdiocese of St. Louis Human Rights Commission. In this group, works to support immigrants who are in danger of being deported by accompanying them to their check-ins with ICE, or the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Now, these men and women who illegally came here to the United States, often fleeing poverty, war, violence, to seek a better life for themselves or their children, never know if their check-in appointment with ICE might result in an arrest, then detention in a county jail, and quick deportation and separation from their spouses and children. We've all seen it on the evening news or read it on the internet. What is our reaction to this social disease? Do we feel bad for a moment and then run away from that pain as soon as the news is over and get on with our comfortable lives? Now, please understand me. I'm not trying to make anyone feel bad. I'm not trying to shame anyone. I'm even trying to avoid making political statements that make us all take sides, one way or the other, and get all angry and self-righteous, no matter which side of the issue that we're on. I'm just saying that I, and perhaps some of you, feel bad for these people, especially for the children. And I have a natural inclination to not want to think about it. If they are out of sight, like the lepers of old who were forced to live outside the camp, then I don't have to think about them. In 1931, during the Great Depression, a 12-year-old girl named Florence Reese wrote a song entitled, "Which Side Are You On?" Now, her daddy was a coal miner in Harlan County, Kentucky, and the United Mine Workers of America were striking against the coal owners, and the battle was bloody, literally bloody. You can read about it. And this song became an anthem of sorts for the labor movements of the 1930s and 1940s. And it took on a new meaning in the civil rights struggle of the 1960s, when black Americans, or colored people as they were called back then, were struggling to have their basic human and civil rights recognized. I came of age in the 1960s. I first heard the song, "Which Side Are You On?" when I was involved in the Selma to Montgomery March in 1965 with Dr. Martin Luther King. And as I recall, it was either sung by the folk singer Pete Seeger or the folk group Peter, Paul, and Mary. They were both there. I was so far back in the immense crowd in front of the state capitol in Montgomery, Alabama, couldn't hardly hear what was going on up front. But we all knew that the time to decide was at hand. Which side are you on? The side of status quo and oppression, or the side of change and liberation? Now, every human person must decide which side he or she is on multiple times in his or her lifetime. When confronted with a sick or dying person who needs our concern and comfort, do we take the side of personal comfort or the side of painful compassion? When confronted with social injustice and human suffering on a larger scale, do we look the other way or do we dirty our hands in attempts to help? Which side are we on? We see how Jesus responded to the sick and the outcasts in his day. Is there any doubt how he would respond to them today? How would Jesus respond if an immigrant about to be deported came to him and said, "Don't let me be separated from my children. You can help me if you wish"? And how would Jesus respond to a little child who begged him to keep his father or mother from being taken away from them? If they said to Jesus, "You can help me if you wish," something tells me that Jesus would reply with the same words he said to the leper, "I do will it. I will help you." Now, those of us who attended that meeting several weeks ago to learn how to accompany these modern-day lepers to their immigration meetings with ICE can't perform miraculous healings, but we can at least show up so that those with the diagnosis of illegal alien don't feel absolutely shunned and cast aside. So what is your reaction to a sick person? To a terminally ill person, dying person, to a mentally ill person, especially a mentally ill homeless person, or to the socially excluded person, of which there are many? What's the best thing to do? What's the right thing to do? And what would Jesus do? Which side are you on?